Robyn might say, hey, I mean, listen, I think Robyn's broken on it the same way I have.
She's this 12-year-old little girl still in my mind. How this was just a temporary move. How suddenly is this permanent?
It began softly, too softly for anyone to even realize it. The atmosphere in Flagstaff had altered. Not the mountains, not the weather, but something more fundamental. Something within the Brown family had moved. As a crack in the foundation develops years before the house falls, Robyn sat by the window once more, gazing at the desiccated Arizona landscape, as if the answers would appear somewhere along the dunes. She wasn't crying, not exactly, but her eyes spoke volumes before her mouth ever could. Kody wasn't home yet. He hadn't been home most of the week. That wasn't anything out of the ordinary. The quiet between them had grown so normal, a constant hum in the background of what once had been a symphony. She repeated his words to herself, the ones he had told her months earlier when everything began to unravel. I can't repair what doesn't want to be repaired, Robyn. It had seemed brutal at the time, but now she wasn't so sure it was anything other than truth masquerading as anger. She used to think that being the last wife standing was something to be proud of. Now it seemed more like being the last witness to a slow, agonizing death nobody else cared to see. Every time she looked around the empty rooms, she could still hear Christine's laughter echoing faintly, Janelle's firm voice, even Meri's quiet sighs. The house felt haunted by memories that refused to leave. And Kody, well, he wasn't the same man she had defended for over a decade. He was different now, softer in some ways, colder in others. The man who had once been so convinced he could guide 4 women is now having trouble even making eye contact with one. The man of conviction is now a man of confusion. Robyn recalled the days when she would refer to that strength. He is a strong leader, she'd said to Christine at some point in the past when they all still thought they were fighting for something greater than their pain. But now, here she was, alone in the quiet. And she knew it wasn't strength, control, and without control, what remained? Love, fear, regret. Perhaps all of them. There was a box on the table before her. In it, there were old pictures, weddings, dinner with the family, Christmas mornings. The grins were wide, but now each photo seemed like a falsehood they gave to one another in order to survive. She laid one finger on one of them, Kody standing in front of all 4 wives, arms spread wide, eyes brimming with conviction. That man was disappeared. She spoke softly, "What did we do to each other?" She heard a car door shut outside. Her heart skidded for a moment. She thought it was Kody. It wasn't just a neighbor. The disillusionment stung more than she anticipated. It wasn't that she had been missing the fights. She had craved visibility. For all those years, people blamed her for being the favored one. She never wished to be the sole one remaining. Now, with the rise of each new morning, she understood how isolated success could be. Kody, however, was living a new reality he did not desire. A reality where the rumblings of his decisions trailed him like shadows that would never disappear. Each conversation with his children was like an apology he couldn't quite make. Each silence from Christine or Janelle was like a never-ending punishment. He kept telling himself he'd come to terms with it. But terms were a word he'd not yet earned. He knew deep down that Robyn was falling away too, not physically. She remained still attempting, but emotionally something had fissured between them. She'd ceased to defend him in discussions. She'd ceased to use "why" and begun to use "you." It was a subtle change, but Kody sensed it, and for the first time in years he didn't resist it. Because perhaps, just perhaps, he was too exhausted to pretend any longer that the man who constructed this family was still within him. Kody stayed in the truck longer than he ever had, before getting out. The low rumble of the engine was the only noise that occupied the darkness, and even that sounded too much for the silence he had inside. He once entered his house, feeling a sense of pride. The expectation that his family was evidence of something more, and now each step towards that front door was like walking towards a memory he didn't want to recall. The porch light was dim and flared, and he considered perhaps an hour more in the truck would be better, but it never was. He opened the door and there she was, Robyn still by the window, her outline gentle against the dying light of the lamp. She turned her head slightly, but didn't smile. She hadn't smiled in days, maybe weeks. "You're late," she said quietly. He nodded, kicking off his boots, avoiding her eyes. "I had to drop something at Janelle's." Her lips tightened just slightly. That name still carried weight, not out of jealousy anymore, but pain. "Was it about the house again?" she asked. "Yeah," he said, "just unfinished business." They both knew that was only partly true. Most of his unfinished business of late had less to do with logistics and more to do with guilt. Robyn's gaze met his, observing the man she thought she knew entirely. He appeared heavier now. Not older, but weighted. There was something in his eyes that let her know that he was losing a war she couldn't help him win. "You used to come home excited," she whispered. "Like this was your place of peace." He laughed bitterly. "Peace," he muttered. "I don't even know what that word means anymore." The silence that followed was thick. It wasn't anger this time. It was resignation. Robyn wanted to speak, to remind him that she was still here, still trying, but the words got caught somewhere between her heart and her throat. Because deep inside she was weary too, weary of fighting for a dream that had become a weight. Weary of clinging to a man who appeared to be drifting into his own darkness. She recalled a moment when he would sit with her. Their fingers joined, discussing the future as if it was something they could construct with their belief. Now, their future was a tale told by another. By another cruel one. "Do you ever think about what we might have done differently?" she asked quietly. Kody raised his eyes, clenching his jaw. "Every day," he confessed. "But it doesn't change anything, does it?" "No," she replied. "It doesn't." There was a moment, a still, delicate one, where their eyes latched on to the other, and both saw the same thing, regret. Not only for what they'd lost, but for how much they'd invested in a kind of love that no longer worked. Kody gazed at his hands, recalling the early days, the laughter, the mayhem, the thinking that love could stretch far enough to encompass everyone. But he'd learned the hard way that love, like trust, would only stretch so far before it snapped. He breathed deeply and spoke words he had never spoken before. "I thought I was keeping everyone safe. Robyn, I thought if I kept everything together, nobody would disintegrate." She stared at him, eyes unblinking. "But we did," she said. "We all disintegrated." What she said was true, and it hit him more forcefully than he anticipated. For years, Robyn had been his anchor, the storm to his calm. But now even she was adrift. He wanted to reach out and take her hand, bridge the distance time and errors had created between them. But something within him held back. Perhaps he didn't know how anymore outside. The wind was rising, ruffling against the windows. It was almost a whisper, like the past whispering to remind them. "It never really goes away." Robyn broke away and gazed back at the window. "Do you think they'll ever forgive you?" she inquired suddenly. Kody's throat constricted. He knew whom she meant: Christine, Janelle, Meri, even the kids who'd grown weary of having to stick up for him. "I don't think you can earn forgiveness," he murmured. "Meme, I think you forfeit the right to ask for it after a certain point." Robyn nodded, tears silent. She didn't disagree because she knew he was correct. And then it dawned on her that perhaps forgiveness wasn't what either of them required. Undefined, perhaps what they required was to confront the reality neither of them wished to voice out, that the narrative they'd constructed their lives upon was finally coming to an end. But not always do endings provide closure. Undefined, sometimes they arrive with lonely nights, vacant chairs, and silence that has the depth of a confession. The house felt different the next morning, still, heavy like even the walls were tired of keeping so many things unsaid. Robyn woke early, not because she chose to, but because she couldn't keep her mind from running around the same fears in circles, over and over again. She moved quietly throughout the house, each footstep plopping softly against the hardwood floor. The children's laughter that filled these rooms was silenced, and instead there was the muted buzz of a life that was disintegrating. She paused beside the dining table, tracing her fingers over the surface. It was immaculate, unused. This table had once been the hub of their existence. Birthdays, fights, secrets, and makeups, all occurring here. Now, it was merely furniture, an emblem of a unification that no longer existed. Kody descended the stairs a few minutes later, his eyes rubbing the sleep from them. He stopped when he reached her, as though taken aback to find her still there. "You didn't sleep again," he added, his voice rough with fatigue. Robyn shook her head. "It is difficult to sleep when everything seems to be ending." He took a breath and sat down across from her, not looking at her. "You say that all the time. Maybe it's already over, and we're just pretending it's not." That line, delivered so plainly, so quietly, cut through her more than shouting ever could. She wanted to protest, to tell him they could still fix things. But even she didn't believe it anymore. They both sat in silence for a long time. The clock ticked loudly between them, ticking off every second that went by like a reminder of how long they'd been separating. "Do you ever miss the chaos?" Robyn asked abruptly, shattering the silence. "The noise, the fights, the kids running everywhere?" Kody smirked bitterly. "I used to think the chaos meant we were alive. That as long as everyone was yelling, it meant they still cared. And now?" she questioned. He shrugged. "Now, silence is worse." Robyn nodded. She recognized that silence, the kind that fills a house when love has become duty. She had struggled so hard to keep him, to be his haven. But in the process, she became part of the solitude he constructs around himself. "You know," she said softly, "I thought being the one that stayed would count for something." Kody looked up, his expression furrowed. "What do you mean?" "Everyone else left, Kody. They walked away. I stayed. But it feels like I am the one who got left behind." He didn't reply immediately because she was right. Robyn had weathered every storm with him, stood up for him when the rest of the world walked away, and believed in him when he didn't believe in himself anymore. What she didn't know was that by holding on to him, she had anchored herself on a sinking ship. "You probably did deserve better," Kody said under his breath, almost too softly for her to hear. Robyn's eyes grew softer, but there was no warmth in her face. Only a profound, sorrowful understanding. "We all did," she said. Outside, the sun was rising, casting a dull golden light through the window. It reflected across Kody's face, showing lines that hadn't been there years before. Lines etched by guilt, anger, and regret. He had once thought that he was destined for something greater, a man with a higher purpose to create a non-conventional family. But now, staring at himself in Robyn's tired eyes, he saw what he had become, a man who couldn't even keep the fragments of the dream he created together. "Christine once said to me," Robyn replied softly, "that someday you'd see the price you pay for always being right." He flinched at the mention of the name. "She did have a knack for making her point," he said, struggling to make a sound like a laugh. "She was right about more than you realize," Robyn went on. "You didn't lose wives, Kody. You lost individuals who wished to believe in you." Her words hung truthful and pointed. He could no longer refute them. For years, he had justified his decisions, believing leadership was control, that love was loyalty regardless of the anguish it brought. But standing in the rubble of what had been, he realized the truth. He hadn't been leading, he'd been clinging too hard to something that required breathing room. "You are still here," he said at last, looking at her. "Why?" Robyn smiled sorrowfully. Because I continue to hope that one day you will see me again. Not because of why it all ended, but because you never gave up on me, because you never stopped believing you could be better than this. There were a million words he wanted to say. Thank you. Sorry. I have no idea how to make this right. But none of them left his lips. Because deep inside, he wasn't certain he believed in redemption anymore. Perhaps this was their conclusion, a slow one, the unspoken one, the one where love doesn't burst, it just dissolves. Robyn rose to her feet, pushing past him into the kitchen. Coffee, she whispered. He nodded. Yeah, undefined, please. And while she filled 2 cups, the silence between them uttered everything words ever couldn't. They were both present, but not truly there. Only 2 of them left behind by the specters of vows that no longer had the same meaning. Undefined outside, the wind changed, and with it came the distant sound of laughter, reminders of a family that had thought forever was an option. Data set but forever, it happened. Had a date. The cameras came back later that evening. Robyn and Kody had begrudgingly agreed to shoot one final segment for season 20. It was not supposed to be emotional. It was to be a gentle introspection, something the producers could use to close the story out. But feelings, as they so often would, had a way of seeping through even the best scripted of scenes. The crew moved silently around the living room, setting up lights and adjusting microphones. Robyn sat on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Kody stood by the window, staring out at the empty street. For a moment, no one spoke. The air was thick with the kind of tension that everyone could feel but no one dared to address. You ready? One of the producers quietly asked. Robyn nodded, even though her heart wasn't in it. She wasn't ready. She wasn't sure she ever would be. When the red light blinked on, meaning the cameras were rolling, Robyn took a deep breath. This family, she started softly, has been through everything. Love, loss, forgiveness, and so many things we never expected. Her voice shook a little, and she stopped to take a breath. But I guess what really gets me is knowing sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes, no matter how much you give, it won't bring back what is already lost. Kody stepped back from the window, his expression inscrutable. He came over and sat next to her. For once, there was no defensiveness, no fury. Only a man relieved of all the illusions he'd previously employed to shield himself. People think I lost interest, he said softly, regarding the camera with full focus. But that wasn't it. I cared too much. I just didn't know how to express it without shattering everybody around me, including myself. The producer remained silent, allowing the moment to breathe. Robyn regarded him, her eyes weary but still gentle. You didn't shatter everyone, Kody. You simply failed to notice when we were already shattered. That hurt more than he anticipated. He blinked, studying his hands, as though the truth was concealed there. Do you think, he said hesitantly, there is still something worth rescuing? Robyn wavered. The ensuing silence wasn't callous, it was truthful. I don't know, she said. But perhaps it is not about rescuing what we have. Perhaps it is about finding peace with what remains. The words hung there like a whispered truth. Everyone in the room sensed it. Even the crew who had watched this family's narrative play out through lenses and scripts and cut confessionals. For the first time, it felt true. When the scene finished, Kody stood up and walked out without saying another thing. The cameras trailed behind him just long enough to see him step out into the pale afternoon light. His hands in pockets, his shoulders rolled in. A man defeated, not the strong patriarch that audiences used to know, but a man grappling with all he had lost. Robyn remained in place for a moment after he had gone. Then she leaned back on the couch, exhaling. One of the producers stepped forward carefully. Do you want to take a break? Robyn shook her head. I think I just need to get it done. Get what done? The story, she said quietly, even though it is not the one I was hoping we'd share. Later that night, as the sun set below the horizon, Robyn was scrolling through old family pictures on her phone. Smiles, vacations, birthdays. Moments that were once endless, but each photo held the same bittersweet reality. The people in each photograph weren't the same anymore. They had all altered, one by one, influenced by time, pride, and heartache. Her phone vibrated. A message from Christine. A few words, plain yet mighty. "You don't have to carry it alone." Robyn read the message for ages. She didn't know what to respond. She was angry to defend herself, to proclaim she'd done the best she could, but perhaps that is not what Christine was seeking. Perhaps it was only reminding her that pain was not a contest. Kody returned home several hours later, subdued but peaceful. He sat next to her, observing her scroll through the photographs. "You still look at those?" he queried gently. She nodded. "Every night." "Does it help?" She smiled weakly. "Number, but it reminds me why I tried so hard." He let his head fall back against the couch, closing his eyes. "I used to think trying was enough." "So did I," she said. Neither one of them said anything for a very long time. The house was quiet once more, but it didn't quite feel as oppressive as it had before. Perhaps that was the beginning of peace. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acceptance. The acceptance that happens when you finally cease to struggle with the story and begin living with it. As the darkness grew deeper, Robyn killed her phone and gazed at Kody. "You know what frightens me," she whispered. He opened his eyes. "What?" "That someday people will only remember the fights. All the drama, all the money, and they'll forget that. For a while, we really did love each other." Kody looked at her, and for the first time in months, he reached out and took her hand. "Undefined, then maybe we should remind them," he said softly. Undefined, she smiled through tears. "Undefined, maybe we just did." Outside, the desert wind whispered through the trees, carrying the echoes of a love story that was never perfect. But it was real, and in that imperfect truth, perhaps there was something to hold on to after all. A week went by before Kody and Robyn saw the cameras again. This time, it wasn't a dramatic finale or an orchestrated reunion, it was closure. The producers had billed it as a reflective special, but everyone knew, in their hearts, it was something more conclusive. Robyn was early, dressed in a demure gray dress that reflected her mood, staid, quiet, but elegant. She sat on the very couch where so many of their memories had been recorded. But today, the room was empty. The children's laughter, the familiar banter, it was all lost, replaced by the hum of the studio lights. When Kody entered, his face was unreadable. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't even defensive. There was just an air of exhaustion, the kind that comes after fighting too many battles, both inside and out. "You ready?" he asked quietly, almost respectfully. Robyn nodded, offering a faint smile. "As I'll ever be." The red recording light blinked on. The world that had once known them as the unstoppable sister-wives family was about to see a side of them they'd never seen before. Robyn took a deep breath and started talking. Her voice thin but genuine. "When everyone is looking at us, what they can see is the drama. They can see the money, the heartbreak, the tension. What they can't see is the amount of love there once was. And perhaps that is what hurts the most. That we lost our way to it, even when it was standing right in front of us." Kody gazed at her, his face softening. "You really think we could have done something else?" he asked. "Maybe," she replied. "But I believe we were too caught up in trying to prove who was correct, rather than recalling what it felt to care." The silence which came next was uncut, the sort that does not require filling. Robyn's eyes shone bright with tears. "I kept thinking if I worked harder, if I stood by you more, it would all be okay. But love doesn't repair what pride continues to break." Kody's jaw clenched, not with anger, but remorse. "You didn't have to do that by yourself," he said softly. I should have caught on earlier. The admission loomed between them, heavy and sincere. Robyn produced a faint smile, perhaps noticing now is sufficient. The cameras moved in slightly, catching the openness in both of their expressions. No villain here. No winner. Only two lost souls. As the interview concluded, Robyn asked the producer if she might say something that wasn't scripted. They nodded. To the fans, she started, directly into the camera. You've been here through everything. The laughter, the love, and the chaos. You've seen our best and our worst. And even when it seemed impossible, you still believed in this family. So thank you. For watching. For caring. For reminding us that every story is worth telling. Even the ones that don't turn out the way we wanted. She paused, her voice shaking slightly. This isn't the ending I envisioned. But perhaps it is the one that allows us to finally catch our breath. The crew was silent, some visibly moved. As the cameras cut off, Robyn leaned forward, burying her face in her hands for a moment. It was not just fatigue, it was relief, the performance, the pretending, it was over. Kody put a hesitant hand on her shoulder. You did good, he said softly. She looked up, her eyes red but clear. Did I? Yeah, he nodded. You were honest. That's more than I've been for a long time. They left the studio together, but it wasn't like old times. There was distance between them now, not coldness. Just the kind of space that comes when two people finally stop holding each other hostage with expectations. Outside, the air was warm and still. The desert stretched before them, endless and indifferent. Do you ever think, Robyn asked as they approached the car, about what would have occurred if we just backed away sooner, before everything got so out of hand? Kody hesitated. Maybe the same thing, he answered after a while, but with less hurt. Robyn nodded slowly. Maybe hurt was the only way we could learn. They stood there in silence, watching the sun set behind the horizon. It was lovely in that isolating sort of way, like closure itself. Robyn came home late that night and sat at the kitchen table. The house seemed too large now, laughter echoes hovering between her thoughts. She opened her notebook, the same one she used to scribble down what she felt when things were bad. This time, she didn't write of loss or of betrayal. She wrote of letting go. Sometimes the ending isn't punishment. She wrote softly, it is permission to begin again. In another corner of town, Kody sat parked in his truck, looking at the old Brown family photo stuck to his dashboard. The smiling faces in front of him were trapped in time, happy, hopeful, no idea what lay ahead. He smiled weakly, drumming the photo with his thumb. Guess we did okay, he muttered. For a while. He cranked the engine, the roar sounding softly in the quiet night. Maybe tomorrow he'd go see the kids. Maybe he'd even call Christine. The next day, Robyn awoke with the dawn. The house was silent, ghostly silent. It had once been alive with laughter and the rush of children down the halls. Now, it seemed more like a museum of memory, each corner whispering of what had been. She entered the kitchen, filled the pot for a cup of coffee, and stood at the window, gazing out at the soft Arizona dawn. The silence was her peace and her punishment. On the counter was a small, untouched letter. It had been placed there by Kody the previous night. No words said, simply a folded note with his written in his hurried, crooked handwriting. For hours, Robyn had left it alone. She'd told herself she didn't have to read it, that she already knew what it contained. But now, late on a quiet morning, she finally ripped it open inside. No dramatic apology, no reconciliation plea. A few words that were a breath after years of breathing deep. I am sorry for what I asked of you, for what I couldn't give back. You deserved better than my pride could give. Maybe we both tried too hard to keep what was never supposed to stay. Kody. Robyn laid the letter aside, her hand shaking slightly. There was no bitterness in her now, only a hurting sense of clarity. Sometimes the greatest act of love two people can share with one another is to release. Later in the day, she drove through Flagstaff, going by the familiar streets that once had held their hopes. The stores, the trees, even the mountains appeared the same. Yet everything felt different. She parked close to a little overlook, one they had stopped at years before when things were still fine. When they thought love could overcome anything, she slumped on the bonnet of her car, the wind blowing through her hair, and quietly to herself said, "I forgive you." And after a very long silence, she murmured softly, "And I forgive me." That was when something changed within her. It wasn't about repairing the past anymore. It was about taking back her voice. Robyn had been the quiet one, the peacemaker, the glue that kept everyone together when others broke away for years. And in the end, she discovered that silence had its own price. It had prevented her from saying the things that were important, from admitting to the pain she bore. A few days later, on what was supposed to be the last family reunion, Robyn appeared. No cameras, no scripts, no producers, just family. The others were present, Christine, Janelle, and even Meri, all with a guarded but expectant look. As Robyn entered the room, it grew quiet. No one said a word for a minute. Then Christine rose, hesitated, and spoke softly. "You came." Robyn nodded. "I had to." The air had grown heavy with years of unspoken words. At last, Robyn spoke. "I know I became the face of something that hurt us all," she said firmly but emotionally. "But I never wanted that. I was just trying to love in a way I knew." Janelle's eyes dropped, her eyes blinking back tears. "We all did, Robyn," she replied gently. "We just didn't know how to do it all together." Meri smiled faintly. "It was never supposed to end this way," she breathed. Robyn breathed deeply, then dug into her purse. She extracted Kody's letter and set it in the middle of the table. It is his letter. It is not much, but it is the first time he has owned up to his part in all of it. The women looked at each other. No one said a word for a very long time. Then Christine picked up the letter, tore open the envelope, and read it in silence. When she finished, she placed it back on the table, her eyes shining. "That is more honesty than I've had from him in years," she confessed. Robyn nodded. "I believe he is finally getting it. Perhaps we all are." For the first time in years, the mood in that room was lighter. They weren't the same women who had begun this journey. Each of them had been shattered in some way. But now something like peace was germinating among them. They spoke for hours, about the children, about living, about what joy could be like beyond the shadow of one man's decisions. There were still scars, still uneasy silences, but there was also comprehension. As she got up to go, Christine laid her hand softly over Robyn's. "You deserve peace too," she told her. "Don't bear all of this by yourself anymore." That evening, when Robyn came home, she sat in front of the fireplace, her phone ringing with messages from fans who still read about her saga. Some were furious, others were empathetic, but most were simply curious, wanting to know how she was feeling now that it was all finished. She opened her notes application and started typing something for them. Not a public announcement, not a speech, just words that could one day be her truth to tell. Sometimes the ending you fear is the one that saves you. Sometimes walking away isn't weakness. It is the first step toward being whole again. She preserved it, locked her phone, and stared into the fire. The flames danced gently, their reflection wavering in her eyes. The tale that had shaped her for so long was drawing to a close. But this time, she didn't fear. It was late at night when the last few moments of their tale passed, unfilmed, unkludged over with music or confessionals, but in the most straightforward way imaginable. A sunset, a silent pause, and a woman at peace. Robyn sat on the back porch of her house in Flagstaff, covered in a blanket with no styling to her hair and no makeup on her face. The world outside was quiet. The sky a vortex of gold and lavender. The wind picked up the distant scent of pine, and in the distance, a faint laughter of children. She was reminded of what really counted for years. Her existence had been about attempting to keep something together that was already breaking apart. She had struggled for love, for belonging, for comprehension. But by doing so, she had lost herself now. For the very first time, she didn't feel as though she was struggling anymore. She felt free. The camera, if it was still rolling, would have picked this moment to perfection. No dialogue. No score. Only Robyn's eyes, brimming with introspective silence as she witnessed the horizon disappear. In her hand, she had a photograph, a vintage one. It was the Brown family in their younger days, smiling faces, hands clasped, the illusion of eternity. She ran her finger over Kody's face and said softly, "Thank you for the lessons." She then folded the picture gently and put it into a small box that contained other pieces of her past, memories she was now ready to let go of. Inside, her kids were watching a film, giggling their way through the open door. That laughter was her new life. Her actual life. Meanwhile, in another part of town, Kody sat by himself in his truck, in front of a vacant property lot. The one that used to be his dream home. The lot was quiet now. Nothing but earth and memories. He gazed out at the waning light, remembering it all that had gotten away from him. For so long, he had blamed everyone but himself. That night, however, for no reason he could think of, he whispered into the blackness, "I was wrong." Nobody listened to him. Perhaps that was the way it was meant to be. Though, some confessions weren't intended for other people to know about. Some were intended for the soul. Over the ensuing weeks, subtle ripples spread. Fans saw Robyn missing from social media. She hadn't tweeted, hadn't been heard in interviews, hadn't uttered one word regarding the series' closure. But those who had been observing her knew that silence was her declaration. She wasn't vanishing, she was healing. Christine, Janelle, and Meri each moved forward in their own manner, forging new lives of promise. The once broken family did not heal overnight, but there were tiny gestures, messages sent, birthdays noted, forgiveness shared in fragments. And then there were Kody and Robyn. No longer the stars of the story. They were its last page, a reminder that love, even when it does not work, still instructs us on how to grow. Months afterward, Robyn appeared one last time, not on television, not in a tell-all book, but in a small neighborhood event, assisting in planning a local charity fundraiser for single mothers. A passerby spotted her, whispered her name quietly, and inquired, "Are you the lady from that family show?" Robyn smiled, a gentle, true smile. "I used to be," she replied. "Now, I am just Robyn." That response spoke volumes. The narrator's voice would close gently now, with a reflection rather than dramatic tone. Ultimately, Sister Wives wasn't a tale of perfection. It was a tale of the imperfection of love, of attempting to construct a dream that couldn't hold up under the burden of actual life. It was a tale of faith, family, and the agonizing, lovely process of releasing. Kody's new reality was silent. Robyn's regret had become comprehension. And the rest of the family, they were learning at last that peace doesn't result from being together. It results from telling the truth. The credits would roll, not under tension, but with a feeling of peaceful resolution. The music would dissipate under the narrator's last words. Maybe the real ending isn't an ending at all. Maybe it's just a beginning, a different kind of love, a quieter kind of strength, and the courage to walk away when staying means losing yourself. The screen would fade to black. Just a lingering image. The Arizona sunset over Flagstaff. The same one that had watched them rise and fall, and in that last static shot, while the light below the horizon, the audience would sense it too. Closure.